Danny Wayland, Dan, Seals. February 8, 1948 – March 25, 2009, was an American musician, the younger brother of Seals and Crofts member Jim Seals. He first gained fame as England Dan, one half of the soft rock duo England Dan and John Ford Coley, which charted 9 pop singles between 1976 and 1980, including the No. 2 Billboard Hot 100 hit, I'd Really Love to See You Tonight. After the duo disbanded, Seals began a solo career in country music. Throughout the 1980s and into the early 1990s, he released 16 studio albums and charted more than 20 singles on the country charts. 11 of his singles reached number 1. Meet Me in Montana, with Marie Osmond, bop. Also a No. 42 pop hit, Everything That Glitters Is Not Gold. Quote, You Still Move Me, I Will Be There, 3-time loser, One Friend, Addicted, Big Wheels in the Moonlight, Love on Arrival, and Good Times. 5 more of his singles also reached top 10 on the same chart. Background: Dan's childhood nickname of England Dan was given to him by his brother Jim. It was also Jim's idea to incorporate the name England Dan into England Dan and John Ford Coley. The nickname was a reference to the fact that, as a youngster, Dan had fixated on the Beatles and briefly affected an English accent. Collaboration with John Ford Coley. Dan joined with fellow W. Samuel high school classmate and longtime friend John Ford Coley to perform first as part of Dallas pop psych group Southwest F.O.B. Free on Board, whose material has been re-released on CD by the Sundazed label as England Dan and John Ford Coley. Seals made use of a nickname he had acquired in childhood for an affected English accent he assumed due to his love of the Beatles. They would have several pop hits in the second half of the 1970s. I'd Really Love to See You Tonight was the pair's biggest hit, reaching No. 2 in 1976 and becoming their only gold single. Their other hits include Nights Are Forever Without You, No. 10 in 1976-77, It's Sad to Belong, No. 21, and Gone Too Far, No. 23, both in 1977. We'll Never Have to Say Goodbye Again, No. 9 in 1978, and the last top 40 hit, Love Is the Answer, No. 10 in May 1979. After 7 LPs, they disbanded in 1980 and Seals reinvented himself as a solo country pop artist, signing with Atlantic Records in 1980. Solo career. When Seals signed to Capitol Records in 1983, he shifted to Nashville and began to record as Dan Seals. He initially struggled, but his voice and sentimental manner suited Nashville at a time when country music began to soften its rural styling. Seals started scoring hits on the country music charts in 1984. A 1985 duet with Marie Osmond, Meet Me in Montana, reached number 1 and Seals followed this with a run of 8 chart-toppers. More hits followed, including his 11th country number 1 with a cover of Sam Cooke's Good Times in 1990. Just as the pop-rock market had changed radically in the 1980s, so did country music in the 1990s with the arrival of Garth Brooks' turbocharged anthems. Seals devoted more time to his family and his Baha'i faith, though he continued to record and tour. He performed at the Baha'i World Congress in 1992. Albums: Stones and Harbinger. He kept the name England Dan for his debut album, Stones, although no single charted on the country chart. His first single ever as a solo artist, Late at Night, did peak at No. 57 on the US Hot 100. Otherwise, It was unsuccessful. His next album, Harbinger, was unsuccessful commercially. None of its singles charted, and he turned his attention to country music and adapted his style to fit country radio's demands, while still keeping his signature soft sound. He signed to Capitol Records in 1983. Rebel Heart. 1983's Rebel Heart, his first album for Capitol, was much more successful than his first two albums. The first single, Everybody's Dream Girl, peaked at No. 18. The next single, After You, however, charted lower, at No. 28. You Really Go for the Heart was even less successful, but still managed to crack the top 40, reaching No. 37. The album's last single, God Must Be a Cowboy, was much more successful than the album's first three singles, becoming his first top 10 hit in early 1984. At No. 10, the album peaked at No. 40 on the Country Albums chart. His first album to enter top country albums, San Antone. His 1984 album San Antone was even more successful. Quote, You Bring Out the Wild Side of Me, the album's first single, reached No. 9. The next single, My Baby's Got Good Timing, became his first top 5. At No. 2. In early 1985, the album's third and final single, My Old Yellow Car, peaked at No. 9. This album peaked at No. 24 on the Country Albums chart. Won't Be Blue Anymore. His 1985 album Won't Be Blue Anymore became his most successful studio album, reaching No. 1 on the Country Albums chart and earning RIAA Gold certification. Meet Me in Montana, a duet with Marie Osmond, became his first No. 1 hit in 1985 and the first of 9 straight number ones. Written by Paul Davis, the single won the Artists of Vocal Duo of the Year award at the CMA Awards in 1986. The album's next single, Bop, also co-written by Paul Davis with Jennifer Kimball, became his first solo No. 1 and was named Single of the Year at 1986's CMA Awards. After it came Everything That Glitters Is Not Gold. Quote, about a rodeo cowboy having to cope with single parenthood. Written by Seals and fellow Texan Bob McDill. On the Front Line. On the Front Line reached No. 12 on the Country Albums chart. The 3 singles from it all reached No. 1 in 1987. You Still Move Me, I Will Be There, and Three-Time Loser. The Best. Dan Seals released his first compilation album The Best in 1987. All of the songs included on the album were top 10 hits. The lone new track, One Friend, which was originally included on 1984's San Antone, was re-recorded for this collection and continued his No. 1 streak. The album peaked at No. 7 and was certified platinum. Rage On. 1988 saw the release of Dan Seals' Rage On album. The first single, Addicted, not only became a No. 1 country hit but also got its writer, Cheryl Wheeler, a contract with Capitol Records in 1989. The next single, the truck-driving song, Big Wheels in the Moonlight, was released in late 1988, and reached No. 1 in early 1989, becoming his 9th No. 1 single in a row. This streak was broken when the album's third and final single, They Rage On, peaked at No. 5. The album peaked at No. 6, and is the second highest peaking of his albums. On arrival, Dan Seals began the 1990s with his 8th album, On Arrival. The first single, Love on Arrival, reached No. 1 in 1990, and stayed there for 3 weeks. After it came a cover of the Sam Cooke standard, Good Times. This cover was not only his last number 1, but also his last top 40 hit. as the album's next two tracks, Border Town and Water Under the Bridge, failed to reach the top 40 in the United States, although they reached the top 40 in Canada. Greatest Hits. Dan Seals' second compilation album, titled Greatest Hits, was released in 1991. It contained his hits from the albums Won't Be Blue Anymore, Rage On, and On Arrival, along with a new track, Ball and Chain, which was not released as a single, Walking the Wire. By this time, the country music landscape had changed abruptly, and Dan Seals found his style out of favor. He moved to Warner Brothers Records in 1991, and released Walking the Wire. Only 3 of the 5 singles released from this album, Sweet Little Shoe, Mason-Dixon Line, and When Love Comes Around the Bend, actually charted, but none of them reached the top 40. 2 other singles, Good Goodbye and We Are One, failed to chart. Additionally, the album failed to crack the top country albums chart. Later albums, Career and Death. Although Dan Seals was a touring artist for the rest of the 1990s, he did release a few more albums on smaller labels throughout the decade, such as Fired Up in 1994, his final album for Warner Brothers. He signed to Intersound and released In a Quiet Room in 1995, comprising acoustic versions of his earlier hits. He then switched to TDC and released In a Quiet Room 2 in 1998, followed by Make It Home in 2002. In the early 2000s, Dan embarked on various tours with his brother Jim, of Seals and Crofts fame, billing themselves as Seals and performing their successful hits from Seals and Crofts and England. Dan and John Ford Coley. Dan's hits from his solo career, and a few original songs written between the two brothers. A few shows featured Jim's sons Joshua on bass guitar and backing vocals and Sutherland on electric guitar. The status of the original recordings is unknown. In 2008, Seals completed radiation treatments for mantle cell lymphoma at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville and at M.D. Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, and received a stem cell transplant at NIH in Maryland. Seals died at the age of 61 on March 25, 2009, at his daughter's home in Nashville. In 2010, a duet Seals had sung with Juice Newton, covering Heart's 1986 hit, These Dreams, was released on her album Duets, Friends and Memories. 4 years after Seals' death, Kenny Rogers recorded Seals' composition, It's Gonna Be Easy Now. The track is featured as the closing number on Rogers' album You Can't Make Old Friends. Discography. Studio albums. Stones, 1980. Harbinger, 1982. Rebel Heart, 1983. San Antone, 1984. Won't Be Blue Anymore, 1985. On the Front Line, 1986. Rage On, 1988. On Arrival, 1990. Walking the Wire, 1992. Fired Up, 1994. In a Quiet Room, 1995. In a Quiet Room 2, 1998. Make It Home, 2002. Compilation albums. The Best, 1987. Portrait, 1990. Early Dan Seals, 1991. Greatest Hits, 1991. The Best of Dan Seals, 1994. Certified Hits, 2001. The Best of Dan Seals, 2005. Lomax 3, John, 1998. Dan Seals, in the Encyclopedia of Country Music. Paul Kingsbury, editor. New York, Oxford University Press. pp. 474-5. Dan Seals et al. Music. Obituary in the Knoxville News Sentinel. Dan Seals at Find a Grave.